Welcome to part 8 of our series. In today's episode, we dive deep into the complexities of perception and belief, challenging conventional ideas and exploring fresh insights. Get ready for an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Let's get started. Look, psychology emerges from incorrect associations made as a result of faulty perceptions. When something is perceived as this insult is not disrespect, that is, when an insult is not linked with rudeness and disrespect, a completely different psychology comes into being. What am I always saying? Our perceptions, especially our perceptions and associations regarding illness/danger, give rise to psychology. When an action is not associated with sin, an insult with rudeness, a weapon with danger, yelling with genuine thug behavior, or a symptom with illness, psychology does not arise. As you can see, it isn't the presence of a phenomenon that creates a psychology, but rather our erroneous associations. And what produces these associations is our history of conditioning, our improper learning, and the perceptions and beliefs that develop as a result. This passage is the philosophy behind my original psychological model concerning the formation of problems. It is original and accurate, so much so that it resolves issues in homes that cannot be solved in clinics. When someone bumps into you while you're walking, you immediately get angry. This is because your brain has interpreted that as aggression. However, if the person in question offers you a reasonable explanation, for instance, saying they were dizzy, then first your understanding of the situation changes, then your perception, based on this new information, shifts, and finally your psychological state adjusts. As a result of this new perception, your brain no longer associates the behavior with aggression or rudeness. Notice that here too the processes of danger coding, perception, information, and association play a role. The industry, in fact, produces psychology through faulty perceptions created by its coding and the incorrect associations it builds upon these perceptions. Faulty perceptions and wrong associations. For example, almost everywhere you hear, if you have these symptoms, you'll have a panic attack. And regarding panic attacks, it creates a belief in illness. Naturally, when the brain notices a symptom due to one reason or another, it immediately links it with a panic attack, and then the panic attack with illness. Essentially, our brain produces psychology by reacting with it there is danger, belief through the associative chain of symptom, panic attack, and illness. No matter how many examples you might give, this truth never changes. Psychology is essentially a response to the fundamental perception of illness and the belief, my illness has relapsed. This response is the result of our symptom equals illness associations that I mentioned. The meaning attached to the concepts of illness, symptom, and panic attack, and the virtual psychological bonds established between these concepts, is the result of our codings. And it is the industry that produces these codings. We can consider this mechanism not only for panic attacks, but also for other conditions we refer to as mental issues. I studied psychology at Haysteep. I took classes from the most legendary professors. Back then, there were very few universities. The frenzy for private universities didn't exist yet. I believe there were about 60 students in our class, if I remember correctly. I used to think, in such a vast country with so many high schools and children, could it really be my turn for a good department at a good university? But it happened. I got into this department as the student with the lowest score in my class. One day, one of our professors said in class, in the future, every psychologist will have his or her own unique method and approach when working in the field. He then gave us an exam that reflected our own perspective on psychology, or on a particular subject within psychology. I can't quite recall. I thought I had explained some truly beautiful ideas, but I ended up receiving a very low score. In our field, discovering new approaches is perfectly normal, and we were even encouraged to do so at the faculty. After all, Freud didn't bring his theory from his mother's womb, nor did he develop it under laboratory conditions. One day, I reached out via email to a professor from my faculty, someone I greatly admired for his scientific rigor, and I said, "Professor, I have developed a method in the field. Please research it scientifically." He recommended that I join the Psychologists Association. At a university, a cradle of research and science, my professor suggested the association to me. That day was the day I died once again.
I said, wow. And indeed, wow. Germany, which once stood firm, was no longer the Germany we knew. There was openness to new ideas and new information, humility, sincerity, a willingness to learn, and an eagerness to be even more useful. No arrogance, no ego. This book of mine reached tens of thousands of people in our country and brought solace to thousands in their own homes. I haven't seen a single comment from a psychologist, nor any recommendation from a psychiatrist, or any expert reaching out to me. The few comments I did receive reeked of envy remarks like, "Did you come up with the teacher's suggestion yourself?" They already exist. Teachers even offer suggestions to the dead, as if all suggestions were the same. It's as if everyone who offers advice is saying the same thing. Just look at what a couple of German doctors have to say. Consider the troubles our own people are facing. I wonder if there is any other society that devalues and fritters away effort, experience, intelligence, and talent so easily. I realized that while the West is characterized by a prevailing sense of curiosity and humility, in our society the dominant emotions seem to be envy and self-interest. I might be mistaken, after all. Not every interpretation is correct. Sometimes a rotten tree sprouts a new shoot from within. Every pharaoh hides his own Moses in his palace. The emergence of my unique, problem-solving approach owes a significant debt to psychiatry, the very field I had constantly criticized. While I was working in the hospital clinic, patients who had been diagnosed by psychiatry would come to us. They would say, "The diagnosis is this, the medication is that, and you handle the therapy." I observed that most of these diagnoses did not adhere to the textbook criteria. In such a situation, two paths presented themselves. Either say, "I don't care, I'll do as I'm told so as not to disturb my peace by confronting anyone," or, driven by a sense of professional responsibility and risking everything, explain this error to people. I chose the latter. I began to explain that the issue at hand was not a clinical problem. In the next room, I immediately tried to persuade those whom the doctor had told, "You're sick. This is the name of your illness," that they were not actually ill. Of course, as a psychologist, persuading someone contrary to the doctor's label of illness was not easy, but it wasn't impossible. After a while, I realized that this approach had a tremendous impact on the psychological process and that the underlying issue was actually our perception of illness and the fear of being ill. Not one doctor ever called to say, "Who do you think you are, my friend? How can you claim not to be sick when I have diagnosed you as such?" This was very interesting. They probably realized that I had hit the nail on the head and didn't want to press the point further. Soon I noticed that even if the psychological phenomena could be categorized into a clinical picture, they were not clinically significant. In fact, this issue was not an illness at all. At first, I argued that one's symptoms did not match any clinical picture, and later I began to ponder and develop arguments showing that even the so-called clinical condition was not an illness. My position had grown even stronger. It was fascinating. I was now resolving people's problems by persuading them that the issues which psychiatry deemed illnesses were not actually illnesses. I further realized that my effort was not solely about protecting people from faulty diagnoses and the ensuing erroneous treatment procedures. It was, at the same time, the most effective form of therapy. People were affected because they mistook a mouse for a snake. In such cases, the most appropriate action was to convince them that the mouse was not a snake. To be persuaded by what is said, it is important to also consider who is saying it. And so, for the answer to the question, "Who am I?" that I intend to include in this book, this is sufficient. Now, let's move on to the section, "What am I saying?" Over 25 years as an experienced psychologist in a state hospital, listening to cases for over 30,000 hours and learning something from nearly every one of them, I eventually realized that the true cause of our problems, in large part, though there are exceptions, lies in our programming and faulty learning experiences. The problem is our perceptions and beliefs, and deep down, our belief in illness. In my view, psychology is essentially a response to the belief in illness, shaped by these methods and the most humane processes.
Shivering from the cold doesn't produce a psychological reaction, but when that same symptom manifests as panic at home, it does. You see, the intrinsic nature of a symptom doesn't matter. What matters is what it is associated with. The coding, this particular symptom is panic, and panic is an illness, plays a role here. No symptom that is not linked to illness, as in the case of shivering, gives rise to any psychological effect. This perspective on psychology is a revolution in the field, a true milestone. In this domain, nothing will ever be the same again. Even a computer operates in the manner in which it has been coded, programmed. Similarly, the brain produces psychology not because it is ill, but according to the way it has been programmed. If you've coded a behavior as sin, then your brain will produce a sense of sinfulness, guilt, and so on regarding that behavior. But the same behavior does not evoke the same feeling in individuals who sin. Virtue coding is absent or weak. The emerging emotion is determined by the coding, and the intensity of that emotion is defined by the depth of the coding. Who codes us? From birth, it is our environment, and then our industry. How does the environment code us? Through repeated suggestions over time. Because these environmental codings are suggestions that span many years and permeate every aspect of life, they are deeply ingrained. On the other hand, coding by the industry is extremely effective because it is carried out under the guise of expertise. For instance, our social circle might tell someone who is upset, "Don't be sad." This amounts to a coding that sadness is bad. Thus, the person is doubly affected, feeling upset for one reason while also believing that something bad has happened. Moreover, they become even more sensitive to what we label as sadness. As a result, they either start to flee from it to avoid feeling sad or begin to fight against this emotion. Both fleeing and fighting only serve to fuel the process. For the brain interprets both avoidance and struggle as threats and fixates on them. In an attempt to protect us, it either generates anxiety where none existed or maintains any existing anxiety. The fundamental role of the brain is to protect us, and it achieves this by wielding anxiety and fear as tools, a sort of weapon. This approach of fleeing, avoidance, and combat only further nourishes and reinforces the belief that being sad is bad. For example, your social circle might say, "Don't get down." This creates a coding that feeling down is a bad thing. It magnifies the sensation of boredom and depression, first in the eyes and then in the soul. People begin to think and come to believe that they're experiencing an abnormality that should never occur. The admonishment, "Stop crying, pull yourself together," creates a coding that crying is bad and I must immediately pull myself together. Consequently, the longer one continues crying and delays the process of pulling oneself together, the more stress, pressure, and anxiety build up internally. One might say, "Are you all right? You seem a bit off today." This, over time, creates the coding. I should always be well, yet today I am not. Moreover, even this temporary shift in one's psychological state becomes coded as being bad. Even the daily question, "How are you?" contributes to the coding that I must be well every day. It directs our focus onto our feelings. This book's limited space will not suffice to identify and enumerate all these codings individually. Of course, such social and environmental codings aren't enough to fully activate the subconscious, but they do warm it up to a certain extent, preparing it to boil. At this juncture, the industry takes charge, turning up the heat and bringing the water to a vigorous boil. With books like Go Where Your Heart Takes You, and in clinical assessments with questions such as, "How are you feeling today, Ms. Ice?" a coding is established that tells you, listen to your feelings, follow your emotions, value them, for they will not deceive you. This is why, when you watch game shows, you frequently hear responses like, "The correct answer is option A. I trust my feelings." Yes, nowadays, when people visit a doctor or a psychologist, they are often first asked how they feel. If someone says, "I feel good," it's taken as evidence of being well. If they say, "I feel bad," it is seen as a sign of their illness. Thus, they establish the coding that feelings are extremely important. Yet feelings are irrational and often do not reflect reality. Just because you feel like the worst person in the world doesn't mean you are actually the best person in the world. A couple of hours later, without any objective change in circumstances, you might feel entirely the opposite. This is why I always say, this industry doesn't even know the true nature of feelings. Coding does not always come about through repeated hidden or overt patterns spread across time and every facet of life. Some expert explanations can establish coding even without repetition. While a social circle might code something over the span of 2 years, an expert can trigger coding in as little as 5 minutes. That is why, when browsing social media, it is crucial whom we choose to follow and listen to. Just as we do not shove every food item we encounter into our stomachs, we should not feed every piece of data, every piece of information, or every stimulus we come across into our brains. For some, the fundamental coding is structured through the definition, little emotion, mostly illness, and by categorizing emotions into positive and negative. Thus, people become more sensitive to their emotions. This, in turn, leads to anxiety when there is no emotion, and anxiety about whether one is truly living, and when one is experiencing emotion, and anxiety about what if it escalates. Ultimately, this both gives rise to new psychological states and nourishes and deepens existing ones. For those whose sensitivity to rain increases, their sensitivity to clouds, and even to a slightly overcast sky, also increases. So, is the real reason behind the psychology we experience that the emotion we define as negative actually occurs in our lives? Or is it rather that we experience this emotion through the perception and belief of it being negative? Thank you for watching Part 8. In this video, we explored the significance of our perceptions, the impact of societal coding, and the power of rethinking what we label as an illness. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means a lot. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.